Son of a bitch.
Groovy.
Hey everybody, this is Matthew Movies Comanche with my review of Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, the 2017 Netflix documentary. And I will say that this movie does actually have a subtitle, so the entire thing is Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, featuring a very special, contractually obligated mention of Tony Clifton, which is quite the mouthful, but also kind of pitch perfect for what this movie is. For those of you who don't know what this movie is about, like I said, it is a Netflix documentary, and you should definitely check it out. And I think it's a fascinating film, and it shows the behind-the-scenes story of the making of the 1999 movie Man on the Moon, and more particularly the experience that Jim Carrey had on it and the effect that he had on others. And the thing about this movie was that Jim Carrey played Andy Kaufman in this movie, and he stayed in character throughout. And it's just a fascinating tale of finding out the effect that his performance as Andy had on those around him. You see all this behind the scenes footage that was shot at the time, but also kind of, the studio didn't allow to see the light of day, and seeing him as Andy throughout all this stuff, and seeing him acting in these peculiar and in some cases kind of awful ways to people, but also to see him acting in a manner that it has a great effect on the people around him. It kind of shows the human spirit, and how one person has this kind of butterfly effect on everybody around him, and one day he can just be absolutely awful to people, and people are feel really stressed out and all that. But then also you have these moments that took place behind the scenes where people had these emotional reactions to him, and kind of came to these realizations about not only their relationship with the person he was being on set, but what that means for them in a grander sense. And it's very fascinating to see. I mean, the footage that they have in this movie is fantastic. It's amazing that this was shot all those years ago. I mean, 18 years old at this point, and it took so long for it to see the light of day. It's just incredible. But at the same time, when watching this movie, there's a sequence where he finds out that the studio is not going to allow him to release this footage because they quote unquote think it makes him look like an asshole. And I try not to swear in these videos, but I mean, they are right on the money in some regards there. I mean, there are definitely moments where he comes across like he's just being an absolute jerk, and he was absolutely channeling who Andy was, because there are people who did not enjoy being around Andy Kaufman because of the outrageous things that he would do, and Jim absolutely committed to acting in that way. Like, I mean, there's moments where he's laying out on the couch and he refuses to move, so people have to carry him to go get the Tony Clifton makeup put on his face, and he's doing stuff like that, or he's picking on people, saying really mean things to them, and getting these reactions, which is very in tune with who Andy was. I mean, it's fascinating to see how that plays out, but it's also really interesting because they also have, this movie is also told through interviews with contemporary interviews with Jim Carrey, I swear I can speak, where he's talking about his experience at the time, and it's interesting because he touches on the fact that he has had issues with like mental issues essentially in the past, but at the same time he seems in a much better place now than he may have been 5 years ago. And to see this guy who's much more in tune with who he is, and at some points kind of comes off a little bit weird because of his touchy-feely thoughts on things, looking back on these things that he did when it was a much more dark person. It's really interesting, and also at the same time to see that the guy who Jim Carrey is now isn't necessarily all that different either, where he is definitely has like an artist's soul. I thought was very, very fascinating. And one of the things I liked about this movie too is I was surprised how much footage they have from Jim Carrey's other movies in this. Like, there's clips from Eternal Sunshine and The Truman Show and Ace Ventura and The Mask. I mean, it just goes on, and I was amazed that they were able to get so much footage. I'm not sure if this was put out by the studio that had own the rights to those films, or they just went and got permission. But I thought that was quite impressive that they were able to do that. And like I said before, I mean, one of the fascinating parts about this movie is to see how his antics affected those around him. And most, for me, the relationship that I thought was most fascinating was his relationship with Milos Forman, the guy who was directing Man on the Moon. And he'd been known for being behind lots of fantastic films before that. So he walks into this movie as being like somebody who deserves respect, and you know, on most movie sets they would have been kind of not necessarily bowing down to him, but be very loving towards him and show him a lot of adoration. And then you see him dealing with this version of Jim Carrey where he's prone to do these really difficult and awful things, and he's very difficult to deal with. And there's like moments where Jim Carrey's talking about how Milos would go to him and basically plead with him to do a take in a certain way, and this guy who on other sets may have ruled with an iron fist, but to see him put into this position where he has to go along with this kind of eccentric manner of being. But at the same time, there's this story that Jim Carrey tells where he called him late at night one night and he's talking to him about the Andy, because Jim refused to admit that they were one and the same. And there's this moment where Jim says, he'll talk to Andy, and Milos says that he doesn't want this to stop. He just needed to talk to Jim. I thought it was, that insight was just absolutely fascinating. But it goes beyond that too. I mean, there's other people that you see like Danny DeVito is there's footage of him, and Courtney Love, and it's fascinating too, because in the movie Courtney Love's character plays is the real life love interest of Jim Carrey, and the person who actually her character was based on, the actual lover of Andy Kaufman was one of the people who was working on filming this behind the scenes footage, and to see her reaction to not only Courtney Love's performance, but also Jim as Andy was fascinating. And like I said before, to see Danny DeVito there, and these emotional moments that sprung up between all the people who used to know Andy, I mean, was really, really interesting. But for me, the most fascinating dynamic, aside from Milos Forman, has to be that of him and Jerry Lawler, a professional wrestler who Andy Kaufman in real life interacted with, and they were behind the scenes, but in cahoots in this whole thing where Kaufman and him just pretended like they had a real life feud, and Jerry actually severely damaged his neck, and they went on Letterman together, and Kaufman slapped him across the face, and Jerry Lawler played Jerry Lawler in the movie Man on the Moon, which was fascinating because obviously he was a great deal older, but at the time he looked pretty good for his age, so it definitely worked. But to see the interactions with them on set, because Lawler spoke about how in real life Andy Kaufman was very respectful of him and only ever called him Mr. Lawler and all that kind of stuff. And this is behind the scenes, of course, but he was that respectful. But on the set, Jim Carrey just treats him horribly, says really bad things to him, and there's lots of moments where not lots, but there's more than one moment where Lawler physically kind of attacks him and shows him that he has the physical power to exert over him. It was really interesting. At the same time, I mean, Andy Kaufman and Lawler were in cahoots on convincing the world that they had this antagonism between the two of them, and there's part of me that throughout the entire thing was thinking that their relationship wasn't legit as you're seeing it, that Lawler and Carrey as Kaufman were in on it together, because they got headlines themselves for an attack that took place between the two of them when they were shooting some of their wrestling scenes. So I very much question the way their relationship is portrayed in this movie, but at the same time, I thought it was really interesting to go through that mental exercise of trying to figure out what was happening. I thought this documentary was just top to bottom a fascinating film, and to see this footage from all that time ago, to see the light of day, I mean, it was just great. I highly recommend it. As far as a documentary goes, this is definitely like a 9 or a 9.5 out of 10 for me. I just thought it was fantastic. So those are my thoughts on Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, or Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, featuring a very special contractually obligated mention of Toby Clifton. Let me know in the comment section below what you think, if you're a fan of it, if you didn't know it existed, whatever. Other than that, please hit that like button, hit that share button. That makes it much more likely that other people will come check out this review and let me know what they think, which would be awesome because I love talking to people about movies. And speaking of which, if you're new here or you just haven't done it yet, please hit subscribe, hit that notification bell. That way you can find out when I put out a new review. Come and check it out and give me that feedback. Aside from all that though, have yourself a good day.